We are live. It's the beginning of 2026. You're on Luca Teller's YouTube channel. Yeah, this is a big moment. This is a big moment in history. This is a big moment in our friendship. This is a big moment today for me. I've been excited for this for a long time. If you've clicked on this video, you obviously know what this is about. So this will be the inaugural episode of something I've been building up for a long time, an exploration of one of the great Greek philosophers, one of the great polymaths, the great thinkers ever to exist, Aristotle. The intention here will be for me and my good buddy Alex to explore this, to be diligent about it, to go through all the layers of the work, to treat the book as a work and a philosophy and something to be lived, and how we can be action oriented and how we can implement it, how it's infused, how it's imbibed in us, through us. And there's many reasons we're doing this, but thank you for clicking on this video, joining us on this journey. And there's a lot to uncover and to unpack. I'll get into it slowly, but welcome to you as well, my friend Alex.
Thank you, Luca. Yeah, and great summary. I felt you're already starting to unpack some of the subject matter, but yeah, looking forward to being here, to diving in to the metaphysics from Aristotle, to bringing some new generational life and bringing some new sets of challenges and questions to his work, which has absolutely stood the test of time. So there's a lot of kind of substance to it, and yeah, as its own form of exercise of learning and discovery and spiritual practice. Yeah, I'm totally on for the ride.
Absolutely. That's why you're here. You're also worthy of the ride. One thing that will be difficult to do is to not get ahead of ourselves and start talking about the book and going all the way to the end. And but then we also want to just follow what comes to mind. So that's the balance we're going to try as much as possible to strike, where we'll allow the heart and the mind to run where it wants to, but try and keep some sort of a structure, because this is on YouTube and it's a video series. So this will be segmented for all the people watching. This will be segmented into an introduction episode, and then slowly we'll get into the chapters of all the different books as he's split them up. But there's bound to be a level of overlap and underlap in thoughts and ideas and spirit. So that's just something to be mindful of. And also, obviously, I'm a YouTuber now, so comment down below your thoughts.
Don't forget to subscribe, hit like.
Do what you need to do. But yeah, this is something that I'm hoping will be something that will have a cumulative effect, and some people will join us right from the start. Some people will join us halfway. Some people will drop out halfway, depending on how likable we are and how likable this stuffy old philosopher from 3,000 years ago is. But we'll do our best to bring him to life, and we'll get into why we're doing this series and why we're exploring Aristotle specifically. But I was thinking we could start with just a personal intro, a bit of a short biography even of ourselves, if you want to take the reins with that first.
Yeah, for sure. So kia ora, my name's Alex. I am from New Zealand. I feel like when we're doing a YouTube video, it's appropriate to first say like the country you're from, even though that's not normally how you intro yourself. But so I've grown up in New Zealand, from a small town in Blenheim, and since moved to Auckland and living and working here. I think, yeah, philosophy has been an interest and a passion of mine for a number of years, really since I finished school and had a bit more free time, and had my own opportunity for some self-directed podcast listening. That's when I really cracked into philosophy, psychology, religion, and yeah, through listening to different streams of podcasts while I worked here, I found that the ones that really stood out to me, that had an impression and really like I could feel updating and like challenging my sensibilities, they were the philosophical and the spiritual and the religious ideas that were just penetrating throughout the world and throughout the psyche. So this balance of understanding human sociology and evolution, the evolution of the natural world, and then also like personal psychic development, as could be seen through some of those phases, like seeing how humans and society and culture and myth grows together and is shaped and informed by each other. There's this kind of journey of mind and consciousness taking place, and the same thing could be seen in human development. So ideas like that were really sticking with me, to the point where I partially changed what I was intending to study. I took a psychology degree and statistics, and went through with that, and yeah, have like, I found at uni it didn't get to that same level of depth and sustenance that had been sparked in me from the beginning. I wasn't expecting it to go all the way, because you do have you've got more of the standard papers and teaching courses, and the lecturers have their own programs of study, their own fields of expertise. So with a bachelor's degree, found it to be very rewarding and insightful, but generally the blend of greater philosophical ideas with greater depth and with more freedom and courage in the philosophers, I've found the sort of more liminal web space and online practice and study of philosophy to be what's really enlivening and what I'm passionate about. And I think as well, like throughout my time of listening and approaching this kind of material, it has been through a lot of podcasts and listening to conversation. So it's very much been philosophy in dialogue that has really landed for me, that I feel really comfortable with. And so then discovering Plato and seeing him as the philosopher of the dialogue, and his later student and pupil Aristotle, who also takes us on in a similar way. It really lands, but also takes it from just two people having a conversation on YouTube to actually like two sages of past having a conversation about love, about courage, about death and immortality. So I feel like there's kind of been a nice seaming and fitting between the form of the content that I've been listening to and then what subjects can come out from that, and that connects it back to kind of ancient philosophy and how that was done. And then a little bit more of my story. Towards the end of university, kind of discovered John Vervaeke's work and others on the liminal web, Cadell Last, Layman Pascal, just to name a few that have been a big influence. And I think towards the end of university as well, with my friends group, really found a good foundation of people that were interested in practicing philosophy, different philosophical practices, and meeting regularly and really grounding it in that experience. So I've found philosophy to be something that is like a practice that you engage in. It's something that you're constantly internalizing and externalizing, kind of in flow with the world. So it's not so much of your textbook and scholarship, although that's really important, but the lived philosophy is what has been super appealing for me and has really found a firm conviction in that. And as part of my experience, that's what I find to be ultimately rewarding and revealing of things in this world, which is kind of what philosophy's dedicated for. So I think there's a lot of goodness and beauty in the world, and it's one of my passions to help share this with people, to be a facilitator of that experience, and to be a partner in that search for it. So looking forward to doing that with Aristotle's metaphysics here, and looking forward to doing it with yourself.
Well surmised. Thank you for that. Yeah, That was pretty wide ranging. I like that. I think it is important, the first thing you said, to place the national context. You know, we both grew up in New Zealand. We both have known each other for 4 or 5 years, and these are things that are going to play a large part in shaping our opinion and interpretation of the work and ourselves, and how it will shape us in turn bi-directionally, of course, because it, like you said, it is a lived reality first and foremost. So I genuinely view Aristotle as the third character in this. He's present with us if we do well. Recently, I've been reading the Ramayana, which is one of the major works and epics of Hinduism, and it's said that when you do a good job, Hanuman, the monkey god, is present and watching you in the room. He comes, and his spirit is well and truly there and guides you like a guardian or protector or a guardian. And I hope we can do something similar on the Western Front with Aristotle here as well. Personally, yep, I also went to university, but I don't have such glowing reflections on it. I think you're being too kind to the tertiary institutions. I had a torrid time. I think the only regret of my life is that I went to university. I realized about halfway through that I didn't enjoy what I was studying, and I wasn't going to work in that field. I studied economics and also Spanish as a culture and language. I realized I didn't want to do it. I stuck it through, saw it through. But I made the mistake. The big spiritual transformation that just swept the rug from under me was reading Nietzsche. I made the classic mistake of picking up Beyond Good and Evil in my formative years, and underwent, if I can co-opt his term, a transvaluation of all my values. And yeah, nothing ever felt the same for me again. I think that's what really kickstarted my journey into what we both engage in every day of our lives, which is just being an autodidact and finding most value and most even comfort and healthy discomfort in pushing ourselves in the way that we choose, and being hyper individualistic about your own learning and growth. So self-development, self-actualization are both things that are important to both of us. And I think we get a lot from philosophy. It's not the only source of wisdom and inspiration, but it is philosophy. So it is the love of wisdom. More widely, I would consider myself to be very much ingratiated to philology, just the love of learning itself. Obviously, we view it now as humanities, and it's taken on its own life, and it's a genuine field of study. But just the process of growth is as fundamental as the end point. So that's something I've found that I've been able to really inculcate myself very in a sequestered way as well as communally. So just for context, me and Alex were a part of a community group back home in New Zealand as well. For a few years we were there together, and then that really shaped me as well. That was, I mean, we're talking about Greek thinkers and philosophy, so that was a genuine point of metanoia for me. A lot of the experiences we had there really profound, and that really opened my mind and heart to being understanding and forgiving of the communal. I kind of saw it as the enemy, as you know, as a teenager, as an adolescent. I kind of thought, well, you want to get something done, you do it yourself. You want to do it right, it has to be done yourself. And a very, dare I say, David Goggins-y attitude, as a lot of the viewers I'm sure will resonate with, especially if they're young and male. So yeah, it was very Fight Club for a while for me, until I realized that to be found in the other end of the pole, and then realizing that that's not another end at all. It's the same end, inverted maybe. We can get into Hegel. Yeah, and so I think I've found our relationship specifically to be really fruitful to my own learning as well, and to my own just enjoyment. You know, Aristotle would talk about pleasure as a in itself phenomena, and I think I view it partially like that as well. So just being here right now is something that overjoys me. So it's where we are going, but also where we are is pretty high as well. So I'm really excited about this series in general. And just a quick caveat, the conversations in each episode will just be as short or as long as they need to be. It can range anywhere, I'm sort of thinking, from 30 minutes to 5 days. So we're going to go where we need to go, and hopefully Aristotle approves.
Yeah, if you're looking for a 5-day podcast, then smash like.
Yeah, and then it's off the intro as well, just on the intellectual front, Nietzsche obviously is a conduit, right? So he kickstarted a lot of my intellectual musings and ruminations into further thinkers. And lately I found myself moving. The thing that struck me most about Nietzsche was the upheaval I felt internally as it pertains to morals and ethics, which is perhaps, his greatest contribution, maybe aside from aesthetics, to philosophy. But then I slowly found myself moving towards thinkers like in the post-structuralist sphere, like Deleuze and Foucault. My passion would probably be some sort of intersection between brain science, language, and the exploration of sexuality. So that's kind of where I find myself currently. But yeah, I feel like it's been a lovely journey, short journey so far, only 4 or 5 years that I've been really studiously at it, I would say, in terms of feeling actually conscious about life, positive, feeling like there's a thrust and a gusto that I can actually take part in, feeling of value to the idea of free will and where it takes me. It's not just about being swept up, but also about sweeping. So I've found myself to be in a perpetual healthy state of reconciliation that just seems to not end. And I wake up every day jumping out of bed and jumping into the swimming pool. So long may that continue with conversations like this.
You've just hit the flow already. You've exactly. No, and it does. It's moments like this where, you're afforded the ability to reflect on where you've come from, do so in a serious way, and discern where you want to take that experience and life and, these particular moments, and where you want to devote your time to. And yeah, for me, like realizing that philosophy done in community and in communion with others is such a key part of it. Like there's naturally the parts of your own thought and reflection that is done kind of in isolation, just you fleshing out an idea or writing. But when you can put it into dialogue with others as well, as when it can take on new life and it can take on new form. So yeah, I really value what we're doing here, and being able to do it with you is wrapped up in part of that. So yeah, it's gonna be a nice ride.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think etymology is very important to me as well, just as a side tangent already. But yeah, even just, when you look into logos and words and their origins, one thing I picked up a lot from Nietzsche was just honoring genealogy as well as a point of genuine, as a differential element, and honoring lineage even. So I kind of already brought up, the classic adage of philosophy is philosophia, but even just dialogos is significant in the way that it originated and the forms that it's taken on since.
Yeah, for sure.
I was thinking we could begin with covering why we want to talk about metaphysics specifically. There's Aristotle's obviously a very prolific writer, and so I guess, well, the actual reason, the efficient cause would be that I asked you to, and you said yes. But is there anything about metaphysics in particular that stands out to you as above and beyond his other works, and metaphysics outside of Aristotle as well? How much have you explored it and care about it and entertain the idea of the exploration of underlying reality?
Yeah, it seems like if you get into philosophy and you're not following a analytic or linguistic take on it, you can't help but arriving at questions of metaphysics. It's almost like wherever your innate desire for knowledge takes you, there's some way in which it's going to want to ground out or find some kind of basis in metaphysics, in descriptors of ultimate reality. So yeah, it almost seems like with whatever philosophy you're doing, that metaphysical question is always beckoning, is always on the horizon, and has some kind of lure to it, like some kind of attractor state to really want to get in and resolve this game of first principles, to see how they're organized, to see how they produce and give rise to things. Metaphysics is incredibly vast and has had a lot of attention throughout time, with it having such a large tradition built up, and the way that Christian philosophy has almost, and Christian theology has taken what are the grounding principles, and found a basis in in the divinity and in divine provenance throughout that. So, and I think I feel the same way about that, which is, yeah, there's always been an attraction to understand like the deepest questions, and not to just like dive into them and only focus on metaphysics. Like, I've kind of had a broad prehistory of ideas that I've been interested in, but metaphysics has certainly been like some of the more mystical experiences. When you're trying to talk and apprehend ultimacy, when you're trying to give an account of what's ultimate, it does afford itself to also like the kind of mystical experience as well. So yeah, I feel like it's a subject which is gonna give us some of that freedom for not just speaking analytically and rationally and in the propositional terms, but actually coming to voice some of, yeah, and like point to some of the signifiers of what's more relational and what has a kind of looking back at you effect when you come to like metaphysical layers and when you come to ideals and in the Platonic realms, like the forms of life. There's a kind of co-creation of the sacred at that level. So I think there's a lot of fertility in that endeavor. And in terms of how it stands out in Aristotle's greater works, Aristotle is like, this is a great opportunity to broaden my learning on Aristotle. I'm more familiar with Socrates and Plato, but yeah, and Aristotle is just so comprehensive in what he's writing about and so amazing in the amount of commentary that he's got from some of the greatest philosophers of the last 2,000 years. So this is, I'm more in the area of excitement and wanting to approach this with a real open and contemplative mind, but I'm not, yeah, like selecting this among other works that I know really well. Like, I think I've got a good sense for a method in philosophy and a mode of discourse, and yeah, a way to really process and yeah, learn something and put your like existential being into that pursuit. So I'm more looking forward to doing that and applying it to Aristotle as we go.
Yeah, the phrase putting your being into stuck out to me just right at the end. You know, it seems metaphysics is actually quite taxing on the mind. Part of that pays to, or is a testament of its inexhaustibility, as opposed to some other branches of philosophy, perhaps, where there is a postulation that there is an end. There is a point where we can conclusively say we have solved epistemics, perhaps. Not, that's a bad example, but there are sort of more less arbitrary checkpoints, whereas with metaphysics, it's very elusive, famously, but also confusing and strange as to what the core project is that is being undertaken. You can feel like you're engaging in metaphysics. Heidegger talks about doing metaphysics as a verb, not something you study as a far off thing on the wall and you're just making notes about it and adding to it. It's about something you're doing, but it's unclear what that is. What does it look like to do it? I found a pretty profound quote. I'll just read this out. This is from the intro to Aristotle's Metaphysics, because they're questioning what is, again, the doubts that surround the project and the endeavor as a whole. And I'll just quote it now. The history of philosophy is the history of the shift of confidence away from the possibility of direct insights into the world, first towards that of insights into the mind and of the knowing subject, and laterally towards that of insights into the logical structure of language. And I think bringing in here and talking about the cultural context at the time of Aristotle's writing is very paramount, because it was seen as the highest project that a philosopher could take at the time of his writing. And of all the speculation that a thinker can engage in, this is the pinnacle of it. So all roads lead to metaphysics, in a sense, in ancient Greece. And Aristotle, epitomized that by the way that he wrote this as well. It's fundamentally fragmented, and it's lecture notes. It's a compilation. It's a mix, right? It's a composition and a compilation. So it's also, we should mention the fact that it's unclear as to, did he sit down and write this? What were the technological limitations? For example, I read in the intro that paper was rare. So if you made a mistake, it's, we don't think about it this way, but they were different to us, the Greeks, psychotechnologically as well as technologically. So if you make a mistake, you don't just cross it out and try again. Like, sometimes you just have to go with it, and you have to build an argument off of that, as silly as it sounds, because it's a huge irk to your reputation if you suddenly just say, oh, that piece of paper you gave me, I can't do anything with it. So there's all sorts of weird side things that are happening as well, because we tend to just crystallize this as, one thinker had a bunch of thoughts, sat down and elucidated those thoughts as clearly as he possibly could. But the history of philosophy, especially the last 400 or 500 years, would tell us that that's very much not the case. And the man in question, the technological limitations, the enabling and disabling constraints, all play an equal role in this.
Yeah, definitely. And it's great to raise the context that Aristotle was writing in. And I know that's like one of the big ways to view philosophers nowadays, and how we learn about them is to actually start to view their personhood and their lives as enfolded into their philosophy. And I think this sort of starts with Nietzsche, really, to understand, okay, but so this is the philosophy we're hearing, but then what of the person? Like, have they really been able to detach themselves from their life's work, or have they really just in some sense given a grand justification of their implicit tendencies to begin with? So it's, yeah, and then William James goes on to really formalize and practice with that. But for Aristotle, like, I've been reading a book recently, What is Ancient Philosophy by Pierre Hadot, and he's making a really strong argument that ancient philosophy really was this practice that was done like in companion, like at a school, at an academy for Plato, at the Lyceum for Aristotle, and it was done in concert with others. It was an activity where, a physical exercise regime was incorporated into it. You would, engage in combat in a variety of different ways. I think it was Plato, who's like the name Plato is actually a nickname for broad shoulders, because he was like one of the greatest, wrestlers in the academy. So like, it's this very interdisciplinary and like immersive life practice. So Pierre Hadot makes the case that philosophy, how it was done in its origin, wasn't something where, you would sit, you had all this paper, you had all these notes and material that you would kind of sift through and, quote and study. It was, and when we're looking at questions of ultimate nature of being, when we're looking at questions of metaphysics, what better source to consult than someone who didn't have like paper and pen, someone who was there living it and had to just learn it through conversation and learn it through traditions and rituals, and learn it through going out and observing and categorizing nature. And I think one of the beautiful things that you get in Aristotle is he's a master of the conceptual in some ways, but that's not the only territory that he kind of masters. There's also that phenomenological aspect of, how does this study lead to profound transformation? How can I think of this entity or this object in its state, this natural thing? How can I really see the impulse for movement and development that it has? And like, you can resonate with that a lot more. So yeah, it's almost coming back to like first principles of philosophy is philosophy as a way of life. And then, first principles of philosophy as a subject, the metaphysics. So we're kind of seeing those two entwined together in what we're doing. So I think we should lean into Aristotle in his context is actually one of the assets that he had, and one of the differentiators that that we don't get in today's day. Even though we have a lot more richness of subjects and texts and description, like all of this, we have almost infinite knowledge in today's day. But yeah, do we have absolute knowledge like Aristotle may have been in touch with?
Absolutely. I think we ought not to use that as a deterrence, his cultural context. It's simply to add context in a neutral, emotionally neutral way, I would say. There are definitely, advantages and disadvantages. And it's profound how much ode he pays to the study of what later became phenomenology, just by, realizing that philosophy, we've talked about it already a few times, as a lived reality. It's not about pattern detection in an abstract sense. It's especially metaphysics. It's about philosophy as physiology and neurology. And you depicted that really well when you said, what Nietzsche talks about, the limitations and the imitations and the intimations of the man who's doing the work. These are all important caveats for sure.
That was great. That was good. Yeah, I have a section I can quote here, which does give a bit more of a, can help to create a bit more of an image of the way that Aristotle approached philosophy and what he was doing with his students as well.
Yeah.
So when talking to Aristotle, his school engaged in an immense hunt for information in every area. His students and colleagues gathered all kinds of data, from historical, for instance, the list of winners at the Pythian Games, to sociological, the constitutions of different cities, psychological and philosophical, the opinions of ancient thinkers. Innumerable zoological and botanical observations were also collected. This tradition was to remain in force throughout the lifespan of the Aristotelian school. The material gathered was not, however, intended to satisfy vain curiosity. The Aristotelian researcher was no simple collector of facts. Rather, facts were amassed to make possible comparisons and analogies, to establish a classification of phenomena, and to enable an investigation into their causes. All this was accomplished with close collaboration between observation and reasoning, an alliance in which, says Aristotle, one must have more trust in observation of facts than in reasoning. The latter is to be trusted only insofar as it accords with the observed facts. It is thus indisputable that for Aristotle, the life of the mind consists to a large degree in observing, doing research, and reflecting on one's observations. Yet this activity is carried out in a certain spirit, which we might go as far as to describe as an almost religious passion for reality in all its aspects, be they humble or sublime, for we find traces of the divine in all things. What really stands out for me there is what comes up in the last part, which can be described as an almost religious passion for reality. So it's this great undertaking in surveying and researching of life in all its forms, in contemplative forms, but in also like very much being an empiricist, going out and doing observations. Like Aristotle was the philosopher that invented like the proto-experiment in some ways, like the proto-biological observation. And like that really is the foundations of the scientific method today. So like there was great relevance and there is great respect for what Aristotle did in his, not like where he gets to at the end of his philosophy and what he has to say, but just his method of how he got there. And in his context, some of the things that he would do to learn and categorize and understand parts of his life and parts of the life around him.
Yeah, that's something that really what strikes out to me in that is, almost a religious fervor, to life itself. And that's not something that was common with a small branch of thinkers in the post-Socratic world. It became very rigorous in a sense and very theoretically based post Socrates, and it's about a method and a methodology. And yeah, I guess, you know, Aristotle also has elements. He is the proto scientist, so he does honor and uphold that is a part of his tradition. But yeah, there's other works aside from metaphysics, like in the Poetics. He does, it's almost like he emancipates himself and kind of goes artsy fartsy with it. You know, he just, there's a honoring of the impulses and instincts to the extent that they're, you know, distinct from the cerebral parts of us. But I see both shades as well and truly alive in him as a thinker. And on the topic of why Aristotle specifically, and you know, why we're doing this series, I think a lot of the great thinkers, doers, beers, artists, mathematicians, everything, you know, the great people to have existed, I'm most drawn to polymaths. I'm just very attracted to the idea of versatility, and he sits, you know, close to the top of the pantheon of great polymaths. As you mentioned, yeah, zoology, botany, just the contributions he made are so diverse that it's difficult not to, even if in that 1,000 year millennia period where he was shunned as being outdated, or, you know, kind of underwent a bit of a downward spiral in his reputation until he came back to life post maybe Descartes or just before that. Yeah, I mean, there was never any doubt of his influence and impact, though.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and if you look at when you talk about the polymaths, like for sure was one of the first great polymaths, and one of the first where we do just have like documentation of all his work. And on that point of his work, yeah, it is just important to understand parts of Aristotle can be hard to read because he didn't write books back in the day. We don't have collections of like finished books that he had. He had kind of preparatory lecture material that he would give to his advanced students, and a lot of that has then been edited and stitched together and worked on by his students following. But yeah, the obviously historical progression of dangerously good thinkers is like, that's the treatment they get. You know, a new empire comes around and wants to ban and banish this work because of how truthful it is in some sense. So the truth doesn't match with the ideology and the worldview of the next or the neighboring empire. So it then becomes heretical. So Aristotle's work has kind of been through that treatment and was, yeah, really well preserved through the Islamic traditions. And then that's how it's reintroduced again into the West in the later centuries. But yeah, the thinkers that have also since like recognized him is really quite impressive. The poet Dante had said of Aristotle that he was the master of those who know. So like, yeah, high praise. And for Thomas Aquinas, you know, who produced one of the greatest syntheses between philosophy and theology, with Aristotle really coming and leading that philosophical branch. He just referred to Aristotle as the philosopher in his work. Like that, he just had a superlative descriptor for him as the philosopher, which it just shows the stature that Aristotle held. And even coming through into more modern times, like for Hegel thought of Aristotle as one of the most deep and comprehensive philosopher of antiquity. He says that explicitly. And there's a quote in one of his books: Aristotle penetrated into the whole universe of things and subjected its scattered wealth to intelligence, and to him the greater number of philosophical sciences owe their origin and distinction. So it's almost all philosophers commentate on him, and because of his vastness and his influence, there was many times where to be in philosophy was to either agree or disagree with Aristotle, but there was no like other ground that you could take that had not been accounted for. And so yeah, there's a vastness and a wealth that's there. And I think you're right, like the advantage of the polymath, and you have like every once in a while you have these just insane geniuses, and they then have, they have experience in subjects in virtue of others. So when Aristotle's talking about dialectics or storytelling, he can also like use his informed knowledge from poetry and from logic and incorporate all of that. So it gives you such a range of different areas where you can kind of compile them and synthesize them, and speak very clearly from like such a wide stance. So yeah, it's doesn't come around super often.
Yeah, I would have no problem labeling him a genius, even though that term itself is so fraught. He himself, like it's not like just because of how seminal he is doesn't mean that he stood at time zero. And he himself would probably tell us, since he's here with us, that he was attempting his own historical synthesis as well of the empiricism and rationalism elements of his time. And Plato, obviously, being his forefather and kind of the initial progenitor of the burst of vitality that just rushed out of Aristotle in a very short amount of period. There was a materialism and an atomism that was alive and present in his time, that in a way that's defined slightly different to our one in post-Enlightenment. But he himself was attempting some sort of a synthesis, and I think a lot of the great geniuses and thinkers in the canon since, including Hegel and Kant, have been doing something like that, creating an ultimately idiosyncratic synthesis that lands and can actually stand the test of time. And his work is the classic example of that.
Yeah. And for yourself, Luca, what really draws you to metaphysics, and what's your own personal experience been with it, even in your own construct of metaphysics, your own idea or picture as reality stands? Like, do you have anything to share from experience of, moments where you've actually been compelled or drawn into that as a subject of inquiry?
Yeah, I've really bounced around with metaphysics, and at times really just entirely thought of it as being complete nonsense and undoable. To other times where I think it's really the only pursuit worth pursuing. And I keep oscillating between the two, and I oscillate between the two sometimes down to the microfractal, minute to minute. And it's really strange because I really revere thinkers that go either way, and there's many thinkers I admire and study who take the subject seriously. And I see a lot of value in the project of metaphysics, but perhaps not in the way that we're trying to get a comprehensive account or a scientific description or a full-on picture of reality. I don't think that's what metaphysics is. I think to sound like a Valley girl, I think metaphysics is very much one of those journey, not destination things. The level of neural pathways simply that open up when you engage in high concept is enough to warrant the effort, in engaging in it. I'm fascinated by the concept of substance, which Aristotle is big on, obviously. Change. I found myself in the last month really confused at a very first principle thought and philosophy of how is change even possible? How can something come into being? I don't understand with the tentative worldview I hold at any one given stage, how something can cease to exist, begin to exist elsewhere, and how can, even I think Heidegger talks about, coming into being physis, or he talks about it as poiesis. Yeah, the bringing forth into being out of itself would be physis, and poiesis would be just the bringing forth into being. But if it's being brought forward, who's bringing it forward? And that's one question that, intriguingly, Aristotle attempts to answer is causes, and we'll get into causes. He gives a nice, for the time of writing, a nice comprehensive account of what the causes are that constitute something's existence. But I do find myself confused and even at times despaired over the idea of change, most fundamentally. And I do think that's something that hasn't been resolved since Aristotle up till now. And the true metaphysician qua metaphysician engaging in it the way it ought to be would probably tell you that that's the point. You know, there's a level of again, elusiveness and just outside your reachness that is the appeal and the speciality of the project. But that irks me, and that just that makes me think, no, that can't be it. Not, you know, I engage a very high level of epistemic skepticism in general in my worldview. I tend not to totalize and absolutize things, or if I do, I make sure it's acknowledged to be a momentary stabilization and not a fact. I have a problem with the word fact, even not just in an eternal sense. You know, I view things as being true moment to moment, and it's a perspectivism rather than a relativism, I would say, for sure. And I think, you know, just speaking specifically about Aristotle and metaphysics, it is telling that his Nicomachean Ethics didn't undergo the same shunning as, you know, as his work of metaphysics. And that's a huge testament to, well, one, the Islamic people, and two, just the general doubt and skepticism we exercise over the individual cognizing subject, as Kant would say. You know, what are the psychological factors, the implications, the repercussions of someone saying this, what leads him to this conclusion? Doubt over these types of questions are very valid, and ones that I uphold and really wrestle with. And that's why I am skeptical about metaphysics as a project as a whole as well, insofar as it attempts to reach conclusive answers. But I think there's so much value in inconclusive answers that I still am very excited about the fertile ground we're about to cover.
Yeah. Yeah, and reality has a way of, yeah, kind of always being in process or evolving or, believe it or not, living. And so to kind of systematize something and then uphold that system as absolute leaves you kind of at odds with what you had set out to do for questions in the beginning. So yeah, there's always that gap there to fill up, or that's going to actually be a space where new life and possibility can have its room to be, rather than just kind of top-down conceptual understanding, say, like just through understanding the world as, you know, materially determined. It's even that as a frame, which is very popular in science today, leaves out the fact that there is kind of an innate gap, an innate ingraspability of reality in some sense.
I think that's the elephant in the room in a discussion about metaphysics, is that it's attempting to outline the root of being or reality itself as we experience it, and at the same time not be unintelligible, because when we talk about the elusive, part of that is incomprehensibility, and for it to be comprehensible and be the root of being is something that just doesn't sit right with most of humanity. You know, we tend to thrust our projections onto the stars even. You know, we think truth is out there and up there, and even the words and the verbs we use are, you know, paying homage to that. And so that's sort of a paradox that maybe isn't supposed to be reconciled, but it's very much present whenever you discuss this.
Yeah, and it almost reflects like your feeling towards it, and you're oscillating between metaphysics being something that's like the only thing you could be doing, but it's also undoable. It's almost it balances this, those different poles of attitudes. And to my thinking, like today, and what I've been learning since getting more into Aristotle is, like if we think about the nous as the intellect or the mind that we participate in, that we have a kind of access or receptivity to, but that is existing in its own natural way, then if when we're coming to make sense of things and give an account, we're using our own form of intellect as part of that, and we're trying to describe reality through that, but that makes it so conditional to like our own subjectivity and our own psyche and the limits of our own knowledge. So seeing like your own study and personal journey towards something as wrapped up entirely with, just fundamental descriptions of the cosmos, makes it be such that, okay, at any one moment you could undo all of this, because it is in some sense depending upon your belief in it as a subject. It's depending on your like recognition and realization of that. It requires your own perception to open up to it. And without that, like, that in some sense makes it fragile, but yeah, also gives you the way to find, okay, what's firm and what's foundational in my own relation to things. Like if we look at the relational rather than the substantial, then okay, we can actually acknowledge that there's a kind of a slipperiness, something that we can't quite ground. But if we can see that as being relational, then we can actually start to make ground and find a path where we do have the limitations of our own understanding included into our worldview picture.
I think it's to its credit and benefit that it's fragile and frail. It adds to the allure and the exploration of it. And it always amuses me how much I venerate a systems thinker like Aristotle when I don't ordinarily, and it kind of puzzles me as well. Especially because, famously Aristotle's works are just, we said it before, like lecture notes, and Plato's are dialogues and intended to be consumed rather than just studied at a distance, and there's more of a life force and vitality easily accessible in Plato than there is in Aristotle. There is too with Aristotle, but he's very actively uninviting. So I'm not sure why I keep answering the call and why I still feel compelled to study him. But yeah, and also the other thing I wanted to say is that one of the reasons I wanted to do this is just because there's a real stark, astonishing lack of resources online about this work. Even just on its own, it's so seminal, so profound and impactful for further generations that it kind of baffles me that there isn't more human capital being vested into this right now, and especially amongst the youth. And thinkers since Aristotle, we spoke about this before, have undergone such a revival in being a genuine contributor to the zeitgeist, and it puzzles me that Aristotle hasn't, because there's so much there that can be just inculcated straight away, and it would immediately benefit your life from tomorrow if you just did it, and that's like if you don't even wrestle with it properly and grapple with the peculiarities and the idiosyncrasies of it. If you just take it for what it is, it would better your life. I think the Nicomachean Ethics is famously the world's first self-help book, so automatically that should be on the top shelf. If you're going to read self-help, make sure it's that one. So yeah, I think that's something I'm hoping to do with this series, is just to make a genuine contribution to public understanding and to bring it from the public unconscious, where it very much is present, to the conscious and consciousness collectively. And I think a big part of that is just us being young, like we're not stuffy scholar professors standing in front of a whiteboard talking about what he could have meant when he said this, and we're engaging in it, we're talking about it. There'll be periods where we bring in anecdotes. So yeah, I'm very excited about this. And did you have any other thoughts about that little riff first?
Yeah, most of the philosophy ingestion that I do today is while I'm running. Like when I'm going for a run, when I'm out there in the elements, that's when I'm switched on. That's when, as you said, the study of metaphysics itself is not just for the journey, but for like the cocktail of neural synapses that you're granted like in that study. It's similar in what I'm doing when I'm on a run and just like feeling all this adrenaline and physiology just really turning on. Like for me, it's kind of, it does fit in, I think, with Nietzsche in some ways, is like some of what the unconscious intention or just the conscious drive is around that, is to really like feel all these different elements, like feel the pain and the rapid breath and the endurance and the different mental states that you go through, all while having philosophy being downloaded. And so you're putting yourself in a very like kind of expanded and open way. And then with philosophy, you just have all these different connections and semblances that come forth, and your mind is going at like a crazy fast pace. So then just your own form of thought is very sped up. And yeah, I've had like a lot of great experiences with that. On my Strava at the moment is just like littered with Aristotle quotes. Because on each run, like I've had Strava for a month now, and on each run that I do, I'll just like post a quote, like my favorite quote from Aristotle that I listened to on the run. And yeah, everything is like to do with nature and movement and, you know, political life. So it's been super enjoyable. And yeah.
I think, yeah. And then the next thing I wanted to say was just why us, you know, like why are we in pole position to be the contributors to the public consciousness? Where does this ego come from where we think we can actually do something here? A basic reason is just we have a good firm relationship and foundation amongst each other. And also at an individual level, we have an openness and curiosity to subjects that evoke wonder, right? Wonder and awe being such a central principle even of philosophy or thought, the history of thought and the structures of thought in general. The only thing that captures your imagination is what captures your imagination, and that's where you're led, and that's where you begin the journey. And I think, no, Aristotle, as good a place as any to start. I also, it's funny because we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but the first thing he says, I think in book 1 is, I'm paraphrasing, but men naturally desire to know. And I think I very much disagree with that. So right off the bat, I kind of think that's a strange place to start, because obviously where you draw your line in the sand is going to be the first point of metaphysics is, so what are the things that we know to be true such that we can launch ourselves from here? Men naturally desire to know. I disagree with that. I don't know why, but I don't think we have a natural inclination or proclivity towards knowledge. We also misdefine and misappropriate and miscategorize knowledge. So I don't even think that makes sense. But somehow, again, there's an intoxication to him that I just can't resist.
Yeah.
It just shows how little I care about truth with a capital T, I think.
Yeah, as you're saying that, like, I was trying to, when I first read that, I was trying to follow it through and, okay, find the truth value in it, because, yeah, you see, I mean, you just look outside and around today and, okay, like, in what way do people naturally desire to know? Like, you can see countless examples where that's not the case, but, like, almost feeling within myself and, you know, the desire to always be learning and put myself in situations where that's afforded. Like, I can also see that, you know, and that's almost not something that's of my own. That's something that I've grown and that's kind of shaped me from an early stage. So, yeah, like interested in the next episode to unpack that. And with what you were saying earlier, like, why us? That's right. Like, the CV isn't a 30 years studying ancient philosophy with a degree in, you know, Aristotelian metaphysics. What's on the CV is just an open passion for this subject, for a real curiosity and drive for this. And I think that like having that sense of passion and sharing it with you and letting that, you know, couple together and mix together is such a striking and also in some ways rare alchemical formula. And like, I'm here to stick around to see what the gold is.
Oh, that's going to be the soundbite. But yeah, earlier when I was saying philosophy as physiology, I think that's the other term that was coming to mind. Philosophy fundamentally and first and foremost as alchemy, you know, genuine transmutation. And I hope we can, you know, take part in that and contribute where possible. Yeah, and as you were describing, you going on a run and, you know, the Strava stuff and engaging all your muscles and bones and getting tired and, you know, incorporating new ideas in that state, in a state of, either above or below equilibrium. It just goes to show that there's been a serious neglecting of the bottom up side of philosophy, and that's something we're trying to change course and direction on as well. So you could read something, you could study it, you could really give everything to it, sitting at a desk, and the difference between that and doing the exact same thing, changing one variable and doing it while running, will lead to vastly different experiences. So yeah, I think I very much can acknowledge the neglecting of one side of how philosophy ought to be done. Like you said, Plato means broad shoulders, and all these guys were oiled up wrestling with one another, you know? So like there is that element to it that we don't want to background too much as well.
Like they were struggling within the paper, but they had buckets of baby oil sitting there.
Yeah. And then even like the whole of Nietzsche's Ecce Homo is just about what you should eat in your diet. Well, parts of it entirely, you know, there's whole excerpts and chapters of that you can just read. What I found so profound recently when I was doing a deeper dive into the Gita, the central Hindu text, when Lord Krishna is counseling the warrior prince Arjuna, he talks about what the warrior prince ought to eat in his day to make sure he can engage in dharma and purposeful action. A big part of that is what's in your stomach. So there's many things that we kind of just throw away by the wayside that I think we do so at our own peril.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and one of the last things kind of lingering for me to still touch on here is, even like considering this approach not as like theoretical exploration, but like in the true meaning of the word theoria, which is the philological origin of like theory and that kind of analytical practice. But theoria in its original meaning was like a kind of a spiritual ascent. It was about going on a sacred journey where you'll, be seeing new things and be transformed by that. It's not the armchair philosophizing, it's the like getting off the armchair and going and having a look at something so that by the next time you come and sit back down, like, yeah, you've been out and seen that. Like it's being on the armchair and catching something that strikes you in wonder. And how philosophy begins in wonder. It's then that beckoning and going forward into that exploration. But yeah, for here and for the metaphysics, it's very much a transformative exercise.
Yeah, just to close that loop as well, I think I view this as an ascent, as a strong upward ascent as well. And there's a lot of value to derive and to experience in the partiality of being halfway up a mountain. You know, it's not all the glory at the top, which is why I think I don't absolutize truth with a capital T, because again, to be the valley girl, the journey is so pivotal. And the destination, and more than that, it's not about it's the journey, not the destination. It's about part of the destination is fractally present in the journey. So the destination is the culmination of the journey. And so, yeah, it's definitely not a dichotomous split. And I forgot the other thing I was going to say. Yes, the etymology thing. I recently learned that perceive also etymologically means to seize. And so that's quite telling in terms of interpretation as well, right? So when you are engaging in the upward ascent, agon, combat, you know, when you're engaging in these forces and lived realities, there's so much value in the partial and the incomplete and the unexhausted that you're fundamentally changed every step of the way. And perception is exactly that. It's to seize an interpretation for the time being, let it go healthily, to forego something, to pick up the next one as you continue up your ascent. And yeah, I found that to be quite profound, that's what it originally meant, is a momentary seizing of a world picture, as it were.
Yeah, and seizing has got that embodied metaphor too, like almost grasping or taking something. So it's
there's violence inherent in that, which I really enjoy as well. It kind of invokes a free will aspect to it, which is really empowering for people to hear and talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I like where this is all starting. It's we're finding kind of older terms used. We're opening them up. We're able to do it in a way which is, speaking in it from the 21st century, from a modern perspective, but yeah, finding the real sustenance in that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to much more to come of this. And yeah, I feel like we've kind of been, really getting into some of the background, and touching on all the points that we've needed to. So yeah, I'm excited for the next episode, and yeah, my copy of the book's going to arrive, I think, next week. So I've been using online text for now, but we'll get the highlighter out and enjoy the luxury of paper that we have to study this.
God, yeah, can't take that for granted, eh? You're just a bit delayed, so yeah, this would be a good point to end it. I think something's gone haywire with the connection. But yeah, so in upcoming episodes and videos, we will get into each chapter more properly, more seriously, and more structurally as well. We'll continue to allow ourselves, digressions, but to everyone, if you made it to this point, if you made it to the end, thank you very much for watching. Definitely hit like and subscribe, comment, any thoughts, any things you like, any things you dislike, and we will completely ignore those and continue what we were going to do anyway.
Cheers, Luca.